Hello and welcome to the Ray Bar podcast. This morning we have Doug Bennett from the Washington County Conservancy District on with me this morning. And we're going to have a conversation about the indigenous plants, things that we do, and water conservancy tips and tricks that we can do in the high desert area to be able to conserve water, but also to be able to use what we do have, the watering that we do have, and use it conservatively to be able to uh, have beautiful yards, landscapes, and also be able to uh, protect our water for years to come. In the high desert, a lot of us were struggling with the water usage, or not usage, but water supply. So, in this podcast, we're going to try and go over these subjects to be able to help our listeners as well as anybody that's interested in how to help out and be conservative in their watering systems. So I'd like to welcome Doug and ask him to introduce himself, and then we'll carry on with our conversation.
All right, Ray, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. So I'm Doug Bennett. I'm the Conservation Manager for Washington County Water Conservancy District. And for your listeners, and I would expect listeners in Hilldale may know a little bit less about us because they're not within our regional service area, but we're the regional water provider in the St. George area. So we work with the cities of St. George, Hurricane, Merkin, Tokerville, Ivins, Washington. All the cities in this region collaborate with us to provide water to the citizens here. So I'm fairly new to Utah, but I have a lot of experience in the desert and even the high desert and some climates similar to the Hilldale climate. I originally grew up in New Mexico. I came from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Lived in the low Chihuahuan Desert, the high Chihuahuan, the low Chihuahuan of New Mexico, up into the Pinon Juniper, eventually into the Ponderosa Pine Forest, and then over to Las Vegas, and then from Las Vegas into Washington County. So got quite a bit of experience there. I also was a horticulturist, so that's how I got into water conservation. The reality is that most of our water goes onto landscape plants in the urban environment. So there was a great nexus to go from being a university horticulturist in New Mexico to getting into water conservation programs for utilities. And I've been doing that for more than 30 years now.
Wow, that's awesome. It looks like we got the right person for the job to be able to have the conversation. So I sure appreciate you coming on.
No problem. Let's talk about you, Ray. So tell me more. I've been to Hilldale, but I didn't spend time there. I was passing through. I was on a motorcycle tour. So I've driven through town on my way to Monument Valley and so forth. But tell me a little bit more about the community, its climate. It looks like you guys are at about a mile high, right? It's about 5,000 feet elevation. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was born and raised here. Then I moved into the Burl Enterprise area for quite a few years. Then I actually moved out into Nevada and worked on a ranch out in Nevada. And you probably know the area, but up in the Lake Valley,
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
I was part of a ranching operation up there, doing some of that stuff when I believe that the Southern Water District actually acquired, or not acquired, but one of the guys that was very critical in the Water Conservancy for Nevada acquired the ranch just north of us and started taking over and using some of those ranches north of us. So
I've
I
been on
got,
those ranches.
yeah. So I lived out in the Pioche area on the Lake Valley Ranch there
Yeah.
at the for probably a good 8 years, and so kind of somewhat familiar with the desert climate, some and mostly. I've just recently moved back to Hilldale and started this podcast as far as a way to educate myself as well as help others and allow others to be able to join this journey with me, being able to reach out to people and know and learn stuff that can benefit us as individuals, but as also as a society with our climate, and as well as like our water and things like this. Because in Hilldale, we have to go on water restrictions because of the water supply, as well as just the infrastructure, as well as the supply of water. So that's one thing that sparked my interest in getting a hold of you guys and bringing you guys on here, is to be able to help people in my network, as well as in the future, be able to come back and listen to this and maybe glean a little bit of information which will help us in the future to be able to be conservative with our water.
Yeah. Well, that's a reality all over the West. So we're seeing that our watersheds are producing less and less water. So while our communities are growing and putting even greater demands on the water supply, we're seeing that water supply typically shrinking. And the best way to deal with that, the most cost effective, is to change our demand patterns, how much water we use. That's the easiest thing. We can't invent water all the time.
No.
We can't always, there's not even water to build projects sometimes to bring new water to a community. So it means getting the most out of what we have. And while all of us are pretty familiar with how water is used in our everyday lives, everything from, you know, drinking, bathing, laundering our clothes, flushing our toilets, conveying our sewage, all of those kinds of things that people think of pretty routinely, it's important to also realize that water is actually the fuel of our economies. Without water, we can't thrive. We can't produce jobs. We can't sustain jobs. So it's important that we also work with, you know, the business community beyond the basic human needs, that they have an understanding that they have an interest as well in creating a sustainable supply in their community, because it can jeopardize it. One of the big surprises, Ray, so I worked in Las Vegas for 23 years, and people probably don't know this, but all these big companies like Fitch and Standard and Poor's that you hear about, like the S&P 500, that's 500 companies that a company called Standard and Poor's has put together. So people have heard of the S&P, but they don't understand what these companies do. These companies are rating companies, and typically they rate risk. So you can go in, if you're going to buy a stock, you might look at the ratings from one of those companies of how risky is this stock, how strong is this company, et cetera. But I learned during my career that they also rate the riskiness of communities, because people invest in communities. They buy bonds, municipal bonds. They help us build. When we build a water system, we typically borrow money from the public using bonds, and then we pay an interest rate back. So these companies come in and they look at communities to evaluate how risky are they. And one of the things they're looking at is the water supply. So as you can imagine, a city like Las Vegas was under an awful lot of scrutiny, like, should you? And we're building multi-billion-dollar hotels there. And so investors want to know, hey, is this place going to be around in 30 years? And so these agencies go in and they rate you, and they assign risk to loans that are going on in your economy. And the good news is that those ratings agencies, when I was in Las Vegas, said, yeah, water scarcity is a real problem in Las Vegas, but these people have a very strong program to deal with it. We don't see it as a major threat. So that's the position you want to be in. And I just bring it up because people always think, well, it's about my water bill, or it's about protecting the environment. But a lot of people don't think about the economic impacts of water availability and reliability.
Yeah, because here in Hilldale, one of the biggest things that early on the founders understood that was one thing that we needed in this town or in this area was industry, to be able to have people work locally. And if for a while there, the majority of people and residents were moving, or not moving, but leaving and commuting to other towns and areas to be able to work, because that wasn't, being able to have a business in town was very limited. And now that some of that's coming back, and the growth, and quite a few different people wanting to do subdivisions and stuff like that, one of them, if not the biggest conversation that the local governments are having, is water supply. And some of these things that is so critical to infrastructure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is, you're in a beautiful, beautiful place, really. I mean, I think Hilldale offers a lot. And there are, as we know here in the St. George region, there are people all over the United States that are looking at these communities as places to be. They want to get out of the big cities. They want to go somewhere else. And that causes a certain amount of turmoil because it creates change, right? And it does puts a strain, especially when communities are small. It can put a real strain on the resources that you have. It can be your water infrastructure, your road system, your schools. There's not always a place for all these people. So there are a lot of growing pains, but I think it's important that whatever community you're in, that you understand that people who own private property in the state of Utah typically should be offered the ability to develop it, right? To benefit from it, because they do pay tax on it, right?
Yep.
But we absolutely need to plan ahead for all of those resources, whether it be schools, parks, roads, community services, and make sure that we're collecting enough revenue from these new developments to actually provide the services that they need without jeopardizing the people who are already in the community.
Very much so. And that's one thing that I want to give a shout out to some of the people that here in the local area, the mayors and the city council, and these people that are having to figure these things out, because it's something that because the town went through quite a change, 6 years ago or however long it was, and some of the being able to come in and start changing the community for the better, but also they started over with people that they had an idea of some of this infrastructure stuff, but then over the last 6 years we've evolved, and they have done a really good job of trying to mitigate some of these issues. And so I want to shout out to them for reaching out to other people and different people in different agencies here in Hilldale, reaching out to the Water Conservancy District and is it Ralstrom, Mr. Ralstrom, that's
Zach Renstrom.
That's come and has been helpful.
Just on the other side of this wall right over here.
Yeah, so he's been instrumental in some of this stuff, and so shout out to him and different people that have stepped up and tried to help better the community with that. And so that's one I sure appreciate, having the ability to have people that help us do and see where we can be more efficient and better our supplies and systems.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the actual things that your listeners can do. So you had a bunch of questions for me. I thought they were a great series of questions. Where do you want to start?
So I think let's start at the top, and just even if it's just a brief or however you feel the importance of the question, whether to touch on it briefly or to go into it extensively, you're welcome to just take that as you want. The first question that I have is how critical is water conservation in high desert climates and in the main challenges we face in the southern Utah or the high desert regions?
Yeah, well, absolutely. You don't want to jeopardize those critical things, right? You absolutely have to make sure that you protect water for human health and safety. You've got to have water for fire protection. People have to have clean drinking water. You have to have water to bathe in and do their laundry and so forth. So those are essential uses, and they absolutely have to be protected under all costs, right? I mean, you want redundancy in your system. But then we have discretionary uses. So discretionary uses are things that don't need to be done, but provide value when they're done. And a good example would be irrigating, right? Mm-hmm. So irrigating landscape plants, watering your trees, all those things provide value to your community. Gardening, producing your own food, that's a lot of value. But we know that if there was a crisis, we would probably stop watering the tree to make sure that we could flush the toilet or cook our food or bathe our children, right? Yes. So we got to look at things that way. And then among those critical uses, there are always ways to do them more efficiently. So being in water conservation, I sometimes run into people that think that everything we do is no, right? don't do this, don't do that, stop this, and it isn't. I guess what we're looking for is that thing that you're doing, is it necessary? Obviously, if it's not necessary, there's a guy in my neighborhood, I swear he's out there washing down the sidewalk on a daily basis. Not really necessary, right? We got brooms, we got blowers, and I don't even think, because he does it daily, I don't even imagine there could be anything there from one day to the next. So that's probably unnecessary. But in your home, the biggest water users, what do you think, Ray? In the house, I'm gonna challenge you. In the house, you use water to wash your clothes, flush your toilets, prepare your food, you drink it, you shower in it, you bathe. Which of those things do you think uses the most water among those things?
I'm guessing probably showering is probably the biggest user.
Yeah, showering is not. But you gave me the number one answer. And the reason people think showering, what I've come to the conclusion is that people think showering is the biggest user because they're very engaged with showering, right? I mean, some people, the shower is an experience for them, right? We all do it. We're in a vulnerable state. We got nothing on. It's just us and water, right? So we're going to remember that. And then we badger each other. We go, hey, don't stay in there all day, or hey, you're running the hot water tank out. And so it gets a lot of airplay. But the biggest users are a little more invisible in your home. Flushing your toilet and washing your laundry. Flushing your toilet, you don't want to think too much about, right? You just want to know, I closed the lid, I pushed the chrome lever, it went away.
Yep.
Right? So we don't think much about that, but toilets are a major user. And then doing laundry is a major user. And in both of those arenas, I would encourage people, unless they have very, very fragile ancient pipes, and that would apply to a lot of small and older communities. If you have difficult pipes, this may not be for you, but I would get one of the 1.28 gallon per flush toilets. Back in the day, people were very, very down on efficient toilets because, to be real, in the 90s when they came onto the market, they were awful. They were basically crappy crappers. They didn't flush well. And so those were the first 1.6 gallon toilets. We went from 3.5 to 1.6. But the engineers who make those fittings did not spend a lot of time redesigning how a toilet worked. They just made them so they had less water in them, and they didn't work very well. Since then, we've come up with toilets that just flush 1.28 gallons. Most home centers, that's all you're going to see on the shelf now. And they test those toilets, Ray, by putting realistic medium into them. I don't know how else to describe it, but they use soy paste to create a realistic medium that they can put in there. And then they put 8 feet of toilet paper in on top of it. And hopefully our family members aren't using 8 feet, but they put a lot of toilet paper in there. And then they flush them to see how effectively they flush. And they can put up to 3 times the average demand that a toilet might have to experience in there, and flush that and 8 feet of toilet paper with 1.28 gallons reliably every single time.
Wow, so that's incredible.
It's engineering, right? We build better devices. So look into that. On the washing machine, what you want to do is get a high efficiency washing machine. And they used to be primarily front loaders, those with the window in the front. They use the least water, but there are now, for those people that just insist on having a top loader, that come out with top loading versions that are also highly efficient. Those are not only going to save you a lot of water, they're going to save you a lot of energy, because the water you put in there is hot water. And then if you think about the motors and the controls that are moving that machine, in the old days, that machine could have 10 or 15 gallons of water in the tub at any given time, and all the wet clothes and the agitator. And if you think about the energy, if you've lifted a 5-gallon bucket of water, that's a lot of weight and stuff to move around. And so you used a lot of energy. You put a lot of hot water in there. And so these devices are not just going to save you a tremendous amount of water, they're going to save you energy as well. So they're very cost effective. And we've also found they're actually better for your clothes. Those old school machines with the ribbed agitator in the middle, we found that clothes, they actually wear out your clothes because they're so abrasive, right, in the way they
Abrasive,
operate.
yeah.
And tumbling the clothes in a more shallow pool of water with detergent has been shown to be just as effective in cleaning, but doesn't beat up your clothing as much.
Wow.
So that's what you do indoors. And then get an efficient shower head. The shower is an issue. It comes in at number 3. But if you get a shower head that is labeled as a WaterSense shower head, the US EPA not only tests them for their water efficiency, but for their performance. And a lot of people say, well, I don't want some bad, I don't want one of these cheap, low flow shower heads. But what we found is it's not so much the volume of water that people like, it's the velocity of the water. When people say, I want a lot of force, we can actually produce a satisfactory shower with a little, right around 2 gallons of water per minute. And we test
a little
these.
higher pressure.
Yeah, well, more velocity. So think about it as when you have a garden hose, let's say you have very low pressure and you have an open-ended garden hose and you want to wash something off your window or something. What do? You put your thumb over the end, right?
Yep.
You actually have the same pressure. And what you've done is you've shrunk the orifice, and that little bit of pressure, because it has to get the water through a smaller hole, increases the speed that the water travels from your thumb. And so you get more velocity and you get more work out of it. And so they're testing them not only for their flow rates, they also have a specialized test to measure the velocity and the spray pattern, because they've done a lot of research on what do people want. It does us no good to make something that's highly efficient that nobody wants, right? Because then everybody buys it and uses it. So things have come a long way. We've engineered ourselves into much better home appliances. Speaking of appliances, the dishwasher, right? We always tell people run a full load. I think it's important people know that a modern dishwasher, scrape the plate, but if you're still washing your dishes before you put them in the dishwasher, either your dishwasher needs maintenance or you probably should consider getting a more modern dishwasher, because you should be able to put a plate in it. I mean, you can't leave food on it, but you don't have to wash it. You just scrape off any debris, put it in there.
Leave the sauces on there, but just make sure the bones are off.
Exactly. There you go. And so a lot of people don't know dishwashers have a filter in the bottom. You should be cleaning it periodically. It does collect a little bit of lint and hair and things that collect in there, and the dishwasher will perform better. But a lot of people don't know that dishwashers are not really a concern for water efficiency. They use very small volumes of water. Some dishwashers can wash the whole load with 3 or 4 gallons. And I've watched people wash 2 plates and a glass in a sink and use 4 gallons of water on 3 pieces of dishware. So it's highly efficient. Give you an example. Maybe you've heard of Habitat for Humanity, where they get a bunch of people together and they build homes for people that can't otherwise afford them. Habitat for Humanity was not putting dishwashers into the new homes. And when we asked them why, they said, well, it uses water and it's an additional expense. We actually told them, no, when you don't give these people a dishwasher, they're going to destroy the countertops and cabinetry faster, because you've lived in a house where you had to hand wash. Those cabinets in front of the sink are always water damaged, right? There's a lot of spilling. The sink, the countertops get damaged, and most people actually use more water. And so once we convinced them that putting that dishwasher in there would reduce those occupants' long-term costs, they started having dishwashers donated to them and putting them into the Habitat for Humanity houses. So the dishwasher, not a threat at all. Anything else inside the house that you want to talk about?
No, that's it. And that's interesting because, a lot of people think, well, I got to rinse everything off. And so they throw in a sink full of water and rinse and pre-rinse everything and throw it in the dishwasher, which I'm
saying, if you went through that much trouble and you already got a clean plate, I'd just dry it off and put it up in the cabinet.
Yeah. And anyways, it's a very good point. And no, one thing that as far as water and stuff like that is as far as inside the house, that covers most of it. And so I was thinking maybe let's move to the outside things,
Okay.
as
That's
far
great.
as systems, and maybe even stuff like that's common issues or problems, or even places to look for like as far as wasteful stuff, like either leaks or things that are the most common outside, like hydrants and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah, well, let's start with leaks because you can have leaks indoors and out. So
Perfect.
I'm going to assume that Hilldale's municipal system has water meters, right?
Yep.
Okay, so people should learn how the water meter works. Some people go their whole life, they've never seen one. They don't know what it looks like. Go out there and take the cover off and look at it. I don't happen to have one handy here, but on a water meter, typically you have this little triangle or something that'll look like a tiny little round sprocket on there, and it's a leak indicator. And if you're not using any water purposefully on your property, and you open up your water meter and that little leak indicator is slowly spinning around, you've got a leak in your pipes. And while people think of leaks as being a dripping faucet or a leaky faucet, something they can see, most leaks, most of your piping is invisible. So you can be losing water under the ground, under the foundation of the house, inside a wall. You can have leaks and pressurized leaks in other places that you won't see it. That indicator will give you an idea of whether you have a leak on the house. A little tiny leak running continuously not only will get bigger and bigger over time, but it can use easily thousands of gallons and sometimes tens of thousands of gallons per year and still go unnoticed. So check your meter first. The leaks could be in your irrigation system, but they also could be in your home's plumbing. They can really, if they're in your home's plumbing, they can really do some damage to a house. You start getting mold growth in a wall. You start attracting other little critters. When you finally discover that, it's rotted the wood, it's destroyed drywall, so better to know what's happening early on and hunt it down. Outside, though, it's important that we talk about basic landscape and gardening principles. And it's important that people know that lawn grass is the heaviest drinker. It is going to use the most water of anything on your property. Now, lawn grass, if you have children in a play set, yeah, you want them to have a little lawn to run around on, right?
Right.
But people need to give some thought to where they put lawn grass because it uses so much water. A lawn will use about 4 times as much water as other types of plantings. And it's partly because the grass itself is shallow rooted, it's very thirsty, it transpires a lot of water into the air, into the atmosphere. So put it only where you need it. Put as efficient an irrigation system on it as you can, and maintain it diligently. If you have some grass there and you think to yourself, man, the only time I'm really over on this part of the lawn, I'm pushing the lawnmower, that's not functional grass, right? If the only time someone walks on it, they're pushing the lawnmower, that means it's pretty much just decorative, and you're probably putting a lot of resource on it. So the good thing about Hilldale, at 5,000 feet elevation, you have a lot of opportunities to plant a tremendous number of plants that are well adapted to your climate. What's the rainfall there, Ray? We get about 8 or 10 inches here in St. George. What do you get over there?
I honestly am not too versed on that. I know that the majority of our moisture that we get out here is monsoon, and and what little bit comes through at that time. So I don't think it's as dry or as like say St. George and those areas where you about have to have a rain day the minute it starts raining, because that's about all you're going to get.
Yeah, well, we got a little bit of a deluge the other day, but this is one of those climates where one part of town, Washington, may get flooded, and Ivans get nothing, right? So it varies quite a bit. So I would, you asked a lot of questions in your pre-prepared questions about indigenous plants. And I think it's important that people understand the difference between indigenous or native plants and adapted plants. Because most of the plants we put in our yard, we have to go get them somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And indigenous means that it's indigenous, endemic, native to the area itself, like that you might find that plant just in the surrounding wildlands around Hilldale. So that would be an indigenous plant. Now, if you see wildflowers that are on the roadside that you think are attractive, there's some plants that grow well from seed. So if you see globe mallow, a lot of people like mallows. A lot of people like cone flowers, Mexican hat, some of those plants. But you can collect seed from some of those as long as you're in an area where it's not protected. Now, if you're in a nationally protected area, a monument, a national park, you're not allowed to even collect seeds from the plants. But if you're on a roadside or BLM land and you want to pop off a couple of dry flower heads, that's a good way to get some indigenous plants going in your own landscape. They're not going to need your help at all. They already grow there, right? So that's
just need a little bit of water and they'll grow.
But let's talk about where we really get plants. People usually get plants either mail order or by visiting a nursery somewhere. Yes. And those plants are not likely to be indigenous to the area. What we call indigenous or native plants, some of them are easy to grow, but some of them are very, very hard to grow. And the plants you're going to see in a nursery are rarely native plants to your region. They're typically plants that have been cultivated from other regions with similar kinds of climates. A good example is we grow a lot of pine trees in the desert that actually come from Afghanistan. So they found these pines growing in the lowlands of Afghanistan, and they're super drought tolerant. But if you look at the latitude of Hilldale, of southern Utah, and northern Nevada, and you just go on a globe and you go across, you wind up in Afghanistan if you follow that same latitude, right? And so, there's places all over the globe that may have somewhat similar characteristics of climate. And they will discover a plant there, they'll find they can cultivate it and propagate it, and it becomes nursery stock. And the challenge of nursery stock is it's not that diverse. I mean, typical nursery is not going to have hundreds of different species of plants, right? They're going to have a selection of plants. And the reason those plants are in the nursery is they're easy to grow. They have a high success rate and people like them, so they buy them. And so you're going to be kind of limited in what you can get your hands on. I would suggest in Hilldale, it's probably a little bit of a challenge just to get cultivated plants, right? I mean, it's not
most
like you
everybody
have 5 nurseries.
Nope, most people either go to St. George or Hurricane or these other towns to get them. There was a nursery out here at one time, but it basically out of business. So
it's hard to keep a living when there's only a few thousand people to be able to sustain you. And that's not landscaping is not the kind of thing that gets a lot of momentum in a small community unless it's growing very quickly and there's new landscapes going in. But you also have the option of mail ordering plants. And there are some mail order operations out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Santa Fe is similar. It's about a 6,000 foot elevation. But a lot of the plants that are used in north central New Mexico would probably do well in Hilldale. There are some plants that probably do well that people might see in northern, a little bit further north in Utah that might do well in Hilldale as well. Some of the stuff you have to watch out for in your climate is you've got to look at cold hardiness. Is this thing going to survive the winter?
Yes.
You guys are kind of at the foot of some mountains, right?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, and so you got cold air drainage. If you're somewhere that the mountains play out into a canyon or into a valley or a alluvial fan or something, you have to watch for that cold air that accumulates on the mountains overnight. It gets cold, it gets dense, it actually flows down into the community. and makes it colder than you might expect. So you might have some extreme cold. Maybe you get into the low teens or even single digits occasionally. So you have to make sure the plants can survive that. And you probably also get well above 100 degrees during the summer months. And so you have to have them be able to tolerate that. I can tell you though, if you find plants that are already growing in that region, they're perfectly content with it. They've had thousands of years to figure it out.
To figure it out, yeah. So what plants would be like as far as very like as far as durable hardiness, drought, as well as cold? Like I know there's quite a few like cactuses and stuff that around St. George in these areas where during the winters you go out there and they got a sleeping bag wrapped around them, or the little
Yeah.
palm trees that are like, it starts getting a freeze warning and stuff. Everybody's out wrapping them up.
Yeah.
So there's got to be plants that can do that can survive the cold as well as the drought.
Yeah, a good example is, so I'm just adjacent to the Red Hills Garden right up here on
Yes.
Red Hills up in St. George. And our garden manager, he's got a grouping of golden barrels, and they're very attractive little barrel cacti. They have super bright yellow needles. They're not stabby. You can actually touch one and not really get hurt. So people really like them, but they're not very cold hardy. And so what he found was that they do okay if they're on a southern exposure, where even in the wintertime, the sun warms the ground. But he found that if they're on a northern exposure, they tend to get freeze injured and so forth. So to me, that's a marginal plant. But sometimes you can grow a marginal plant in the right place, like on the southwest side of your house would be more protected. It's not going to get as cold there most of the time. But we spend so much on these things, and we invest water and time and maintenance. The idea that even if it was once every 10 years, you got a freeze that killed that thing, probably should have picked another plant, right? I mean, we don't want that outcome. There's a plant list that you can get online out of Las Vegas that's probably worth looking at. There are some plant lists, like I said, at your elevation. Las Vegas is only 2,000 feet elevation, so it's not going to be as cold as Hilldale. But some of the plants are going to be adapted there. You can look at plant list, and when you see a plant, they'll give you the USDA hardiness zone, and you can look at Hilldale zone on the internet, figure out how cold it gets there, and then you need to choose plants that are capable of surviving that coldness. As for heat, some plants don't have good heat tolerance. I don't think it'd be a problem at 5,000 feet so much, but we're starting to find in some desert climates, some of the plants like the purple plums, they're starting to struggle as communities get hotter and hotter. So down in Las Vegas, where you had not only the heat of the desert, but you also had the heat island effect of all the buildings and streets and sidewalks, purple plum was not a viable plant anymore. They were living only a handful of years, and then they would get injured, and then they would start dying off. So you don't want to get those plants that are on the cusp of not being able to perform well. Most of the desert adapted plants are many of them are tolerable to the heat and the cold, but I would be leery of the cold fraction. That's probably a bigger threat.
Well, I have a sister that lives in Vegas, and just recently she was telling me that Las Vegas enacted some kind of a ordinance to be able to remove any grass or anything like that from anything that wasn't necessary, to where it's had to go into a desert landscape. And the Water Conservancy from that, I don't know, coming from that area, can you talk a little more on that? And maybe I mean, I know it's not in this area, but as far as what they went in and did, and the conservancy on their water and in different things like that, because I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, so Las Vegas is a very water scarce and fast growing community, and I was there 23 years. I got there in 2000. I just left there earlier this year. And so most of those programs I had a hand in helping build. And for those 23 years, Ray, we offered people a rebate where we said, if you take those lawns that are not functional, that your kids don't play on, that are just laying there trying to look pretty and sucking up a lot of water, that we would give you a rebate, right, to help you pay for the project to put the water efficient landscaping in. And we ran that program for more than 2 decades, but what we found that we still had a lot of commercial properties, big box stores and strip malls and fast food restaurants that still had grass lawns in front of them left over from the 90s and the 80s, and they hadn't taken advantage of these programs. And knowing what the challenges are there, the state legislature was actually the one that enacted a state law that said, if you have non-functional turf in a non-residential application, you have 5 years to change it. That's how important how serious government is about ensuring that they have a continuous, reliable water supply. Now, those people still get a rebate, and some of them were very upset about the idea that they had to do something. And they kind of felt like, the hammer was being dropped on them. And I'm like, well, we've kind of been saying this for 25 years. I don't think it's a big surprise. So,
You've had time to do something about it, but now when you're forced to do it, it's like,
and we need to look at our water supply as something we all share. And whether we're sharing that with people that are new to our community or our existing neighbors, the point is it's a resource that everybody's going to need access to. And making collective decisions as a community is really the way to go. Just trying to pretend it's not happening, that there's not new homes coming into Hilldale is not going to solve the problem. Solving the problem is projecting where things are going and planning ahead to make sure that you don't run into a crisis.
So one thing I'd like to just clarify, especially for some of the listeners that'll come in later, is a lot of the homes out here are some of them are built in the 80s, the 90s, and so just to do a really quick recap, what are some of the best things or the quickest things to help conserve water? And the things that I've gleaned from this conversation is update your toilets, update your washers, update your dishwashers, and update your shower heads to the SmartWise or whatever.
WaterSense,
WaterSense
certified. Which is almost every shower head you're going to see in a home store is going to have that WaterSense label on it now.
Nice.
So that's what you're doing indoors, but it's important to realize that most people who live in suburban style homes have significant landscape, or if you have a very large lot, your landscaping probably uses far more water than your household occupants are using. So I would say the first place to go is to your yard. Rethink, if you have a lawn, rethink your lawn. Does it need to be that big? Can you get by with less lawn? Can you downsize the lawn? And actually that's a pretty simple project because sprinkler systems are laid out on a grid. So if I have a 30-foot wide lawn and it's 30 by 30, I can take it down to a 20 by 20, right? By simply capping some sprinkler heads and redefining it, moving some nozzles around and things like that. So it's pretty easy to shrink a lawn without a huge capital expenditure. Think about the plants you have in your landscape and how you water them. Some people water by hand. If you're watering by hand, you probably have plants that are pretty drought tolerant because, who's going to do that while you're on vacation or if you leave town for a week?
Yes.
So don't water any more than necessary. If you do have a lawn, and it's on an automatic controller, I would get one of the WaterSense controllers. Now, WaterSense controller, real affordable. You can get a rebate on it. It's going to pay about 3/4 of the cost of it at utahwatersavers.com. So you just go to the website utahwatersavers.com. You get information about how to get a rebate. This controller has Wi-Fi in it. It connects to the network at your home, and it gets weather data continuously. And then it decides, do I need to water? Did it just rain? Is it about to rain? hey, you got me scheduled to water the lawn this morning, but the internet's telling me it's going to rain, so I'm not going to do it, right? And then I
Yeah.
just had that happen yesterday, day before yesterday, Ray. I got up in the morning, I look at my smartphone, and there's a message on the screen that says
Water
24-hour
delay.
delay on your irrigation schedule. And when I got up, it did not look like it was going to rain, but I hadn't checked the weather. By the time I got to my office and a few hours into the workday, clouds gathered, raindrops started hitting the window here. It poured rain. If my irrigation system had run at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, I would have put water on top of water, right? But the
And would have
smart
wasted it.
controller said, hey, the water's coming. I'm not going to spend your water. I'm going to wait for nature to see what she does. And it did. It was very effective. So it can be kind of a hands-off approach. You don't have to manage it as much. You don't have to pay too much attention. Back in the old days, even with that controller, before these smart controllers, if you're very serious about saving water, a lot of us have gotten up in the middle of the night, 2 in the morning, a thunderstorm comes through. You get up in your underwear, you go wandering through a dark house, and you find this controller to turn it to off, right?
Yep.
And I've done that before. I don't have to do that anymore. If it rains, the controller knows that happened. It's a blessing. No more stumbling around in the middle of the night, bleary-eyed and unclothed, trying to go out and turn a dial on something. You can also control it from your own phone. So let's say I'm out in the front yard, or I have sprinklers front, back, side, and I want to just check them. I want to see if there's anything broken, or I want to
Out of
adjust the
adjustment.
nozzles. Yeah,
Yep.
I can actually turn the system on from my phone like a remote control. So I can turn it on, check everything out, turn it off again, turn on the next station, have a look at it. You're not running back and forth to the garage or the shed or the side of the house,
Yes.
switching these stations so you can turn them on and do a quick inspection.
Yeah,
So
because
those
I
controls are-
I have the Beehive system on the
that's what
system
I
I
got.
have here,
Yeah.
and that is so efficient and so nice. And
Yeah.
you can do anything as long as you have a Wi-Fi or an internet connection to be able to go in and adjust and work on it. Because so many of them in the past is only Bluetooth, or you have to be in the area, where being able to jump on here we have water restrictions where they're just like, hey, our water levels are low. They go from every other day, even addresses on one day, odds on the other day. And so watching the local either just the local Facebook pages and stuff of the city and stuff, I can go in there and say, oh, hey, that's a stage 4 restriction. There's no watering of lawns. There's only, hand watering of certain vital plants.
Mhm.
And so and I can be out of town and I can jump on there and turn my systems on and off according
Right.
to how that works.
Yeah,
So yeah, definitely having a smart controller, I can only imagine the savings it can bring, as well as the efficiency and the
the
convenience.
convenience. Yeah, the
Yes.
convenience. I mean, you can be another part of the world and somebody tell you, hey, you got a broken sprinkler head and there's water gushing out, and you can push a button on your phone from India and turn off
And
your
have it
sprinkler
turn it off.
system,
Yep.
right? So that's pretty cool. And
Yeah,
you
I
mentioned,
love technology.
yeah, you mentioned the Beehive, and I want your listeners to know that that's from Orbit, and Orbit is a Utah company. So
really?
they're one of the large irrigation manufacturers located here in Utah, and that's pretty unusual. Most of the large irrigation companies are Rainbirds out of Arizona, has a strong presence in Arizona and California, but most of those big companies are on the California coast. So that's an exciting product that comes from a Utah-based company. So,
Awesome. One thing I wanted to jump on and kind of talk about is some people don't understand, and maybe some people have never thought about it, but rainwater collection. I don't know if that's something that, like, being able to have a way to collect some of the runoff off your home or whatever and use that to water your plants. Because I remember there was a dear old lady I used to help and uh, do her gardening and stuff, and she would put 5-gallon buckets at the end of the downspouts
yeah,
of her home, and she'd go out and get her little her little water can, and she'd go water her roses and her flowers with it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's something that comes up that makes that or ideas or things like that, maybe you can touch on.
Yeah, so rainwater harvesting, it depends how much effort you want to put into it. So if you have very low rainfall, it's probably not worth the effort. I'm kind of a big advocate for passive rainwater harvesting. So where you know that your house is going to shed a lot of water or where a downspout comes down, you what you do is you dig a little mock riverbed, right? And you actually channel that water to move through your property, and you put the big river rock in there. Some people will even put the impermeable plastic underneath it because they want it to convey the water to a particular part of their yard. They don't want it soaking into the soil till it gets to a certain place. And so you might do some of that. But the idea would be that on the banks of this fake stream, you're putting in plants that can live with deep, infrequent irrigation. And this rainwater harvesting system, what you would do is you would create a swale. This little riverbed would eventually become a shallow pond area. And that pond would fill up with some water, not like a big mess or anything, but a few inches of water. And then that soaks into the soil. And then you've got deep-rooted plantings planted around that. And so you've just irrigated them without having to have a container to collect water in. And
I see. Okay.
And then you would turn off the irrigation to the plants that could go long periods of time. So if you had your irrigation system properly zoned, there's a lot of opportunities for that in commercial development. I mean, we're building parking lots. Think about a city building or a community center or any place that has parking spaces for the public. That parking lot or a rooftop, those are all big water harvesting surfaces. And if we think through what we can do with that water, instead of letting it be a nuisance, it can become a resource. Now let's talk about active water harvesting, where you're actually building a system and catching the water in containers. Usually people use old 55-gallon drums that came from the food service industry.
Yes.
So some companies buy like cooking oil in gigantic drums, or other products that are food safe, harmless kinds of products. So sometimes you can get clean plastic drums. You put them in sequence, one next to the other, where when one barrel fills up, it overflows into the next, and you can decide how much storage you want. They usually need to be elevated because you need to get water back out. So you either have to have a little electric pump to get water out of the barrels, or you have an elevated
gravity feed.
Yeah,
yes.
You gravity feed through a hose to the areas where you want to use it. It requires, people like to think it's a really simple system, but you've got a lot of forces are fighting against you. Algae's trying to grow in there. Mosquitoes are trying to get into those barrels. There's a lot of stuff that goes along with having it. So if you want to do it well and be prepared that it's going to require some of your time to manage and maintain it.
Okay. So the next thing I wanted to kind of go over a little bit is in this area, or in the high desert area, is the drip systems and the more high efficiency watering systems. What is your experience, and what is a typical or a good way to either address switching out, like say your lawn and throwing in a extra system, or just basically attaching your drip system to your sprinkler system and turn it into more of a deserty landscape.
Yeah.
And the efficiency of from going from garden to that landscape.
Well, drip is far more efficient than spray irrigation. So what if I told you, hey, Ray, your heater at your house is only 38% efficient. For every bit of energy you put in it, you only get 38% of it back out doing work. That's awful, right? That's terrible. Most people's sprinkler systems are less than 50% efficient at applying the water to lawns. So they're either misdirecting the water, they're not designed properly to apply the water evenly, and in the end, what happens is people get dry spots because this thing's not very good at doing its job well. And then they turn up the whole system. So some areas are big squishy spots and other areas are barely struggling to stay alive. So sprinklers are, it's what we do for lawns, but they're not that efficient. Drip irrigation, if you want to make a conversion from a lawn sprinkler system to drip system, don't attach drip components to a line that also runs sprinklers, right? They're not compatible with each other. They can't be on the same valve. You've got to have dedicated valves for sprinklers and drip systems. A drip system also needs two other things. It needs a pressure regulator because drip systems are supposed to run between 15 and 25 PSI. And municipal water is usually around 40 to 60 PSI. And sometimes it's 100 PSI. And drip systems they're held together by friction. You have a coupler and then you have a drip tube, and they're just held together by the friction between those two parts. If you put too much pressure in them, they just blow apart. Yeah, everything comes apart, and then you're wasting water, right? You're not getting it where it needs. So put a pressure regulator. The filter you have to have on there, because if there's any sediment, a grain of sand, any debris whatsoever, a flake of rust that came off of a pipe somewhere in the system, it can clog a drip emitter. And if that drip emitter gets clogged, the plant gets no water, right? So you got to have the filter on there too. It's going to catch all that sediment. Now you're going to have this really cool soft plastic tubing that takes the water to your plants. And what I like about it, Ray, is it's not complicated. It's tinker toys. Like you could teach a child how to put this stuff together. I don't need any special glue. I don't need special cutters. I'm not hacksawing anything. A pair of kitchen shears or a pruning shears can cut the pipe. You can, all this stuff squeezes together. Any homeowner can put it together. When it breaks, the downside is, if it's buried, it's easy to cut through too. If I jump on a shovel, it goes right there. Right? The right side is I go get a coupler and I dig up a little hole and I put that coupler in there and I'm back in business again, right? I don't have to call somebody. It's really simple stuff. The drip emitters themselves are applying water right where the plant needs it. We place them around the root zone of the plant. You might have multiple emitters around a plant, and you should always have at least two. And that way, if an emitter gets clogged or something happens to it, the plant's still getting some water.
As an alternate source.
Yeah, you don't want to just notice it's dead, right? Yes. So you should always have at least two, but usually you put several emitters around a plant because you want nice, even, deep wetting of the root system. And you don't have to worry about the wind. You ever go out I especially like at sunrise. If somebody's running sprinklers and the sun is just coming up, sometimes you see it looks like smoke. It looks like something's on fire. That's your water vaporizing into the atmosphere. That is
it's not even touching the grass.
It's atomized water. So it gets atomized and it's such tiny droplets that just blow away. Or you've seen in a high wind where somebody's trying to water a park or something and the sprinkler cannot even get on the grass. It's all blowing off into the street in a 35-mile-an-hour wind. We don't have those problems with drip. They're a few inches off the soil surface, and they're putting the water right there in place where we decided the plant needs it.
With the smart watering stuff, that it changes and adjusts for that too. So that's another reason why the smart watering systems are very useful.
Right. So at my house, I don't have any turf grass or spray. Everything there is drip irrigation. And you can create some beautiful landscapes that way. I mean, if you don't have a need for a lawn, the other thing I like, Ray, is I don't think, I have a dog. So if I'm traveling and I can't take my dog, I'm not going camping or something where I can take her with me. I got to find somebody to take care of my dog. And it's tough sometimes. But there are people that have a lawn that have to do that. They're going to leave town for 2 or 3 weeks. Somebody's got to mow that lawn or they come back to an unmanageable lawn, right? It gets out of control and they're not able to mow it. So you can leave these drip irrigated desert adapted landscapes for several months And, you come back and, okay, a tumbleweed blew in and here's a piece of trash. And,
Yep.
you're only doing periodic maintenance. It's really not a big deal. So it's great. I imagine Hilldale's going to attract some of these seasonal homeowners, just like.
Yes, I know that there's developments that are wanting to come in and be, and start doing these, but it is the watering system and the water supply and the system that is one of the main topics and benefactors into those decisions.
Yeah. So we need, maybe if somebody's going to have a seasonal home, they absolutely should have a smart controller. If they live in Salt Lake City, or we have residents here that live in Alaska in the summer and live in St. George in the winter. And so it's important that they have these smart controls, that they know what's going on with their property. And it's also responsible for them to put in landscaping that has low demands, because it's not their full-time home, right? They're not always there using it, but the landscape needs water all year round, whether you're there or not. And, the responsible way to do that, I think, and beneficial way, is to have a low demand landscape. So I don't have to have somebody over there every single week, even though I'm not even in the house.
Okay. And so, well, I want to jump onto this other subject. Is for those that do have lawns, and it is something that they are either attached to or something that is important to them. Watering the watering schedules and how to be the most efficient if you're going to keep your lawn and water the lawn system. Can you go into that a little bit, as far as because I know we're been on here
Sure.
for about an hour now, but
Yeah.
to be able to bring awareness to those that do have lawns and to help them understand, basically the saturation process versus just running up for 45 minutes or 30 minutes. And like, I know for me, I know that it's a double cycle of 15 minutes to let
Yeah.
it go in and soak in and then come back and do it again, versus run up for 30 minutes, give it a break, let it soak in.
Yeah. And that's especially important on slopes, because we don't want gravity taking the water off the property before it gets a chance to go in and soak in. So you're right.
Yes.
Cycling can be really important. What I want people to do, Ray, this is a simple test, and I think it's worth the investment, but get 6 containers, open topped containers, all of the same size. All right. They don't necessarily have to be the same size, but it's best.
Tuna fish cans is what I've heard of.
Tuna cans, canned chicken, soup cans. I don't care. You can go get 6 cups out of your kitchen cabinet if they're all identical to each other, and put those out there. Run your irrigation system for 10 minutes. Now go around, spread these cups out to different places on your lawn. Now you go out after 10 minutes and you look in those cups, and you realize that some of them have hardly any water in them, and others have substantial amounts of water in them. That is your indicator of distribution uniformity. And if it's weak, if you have a lot of disparity in the amount of water in each of those cups, you have a system that's going to use a ton of water, because you're trying to keep the lawn green, right? So you need to improve the uniformity of it, figure out why some areas don't get water like they're supposed to. Then you can combine all of the water from all 6 cups into 1 cup, and the depth of the water that you have will tell you how many inches per hour your landscape system puts on. We took 6 times 10, right? So now we have 60 minutes worth of average water. And we look at it and say, oh, I got half an inch of water, right, from my 6 cups. So my system applies half an inch per hour. Or some systems will apply 1.5 inches per hour. Now you have an idea of rainfall equivalency. And depending on your soil, if soils are sandy there, a little bit of water goes a very long way into sand. So you don't water very much, but you probably water more frequently. If you have clay soils or loamy soils, a little bit of water only goes a few inches. So you would water more water, but less frequently. But that would be where to start, is figure out how many inches you put on. Then the other thing you want to watch for is obstructed spray nozzles, like the grass is blocking the spray, or there's a big landscape rock and the sprinkler's hitting it, or a tree trunk, stuff like that. Eliminate that. Check for flaws, and then start playing around. There are ways to calculate how frequently to irrigate based on the weather. But with this information, that smart controller, you can go back into your beehive, tell it some of these things, and it will start trying to come up with a schedule for you. But the idea is you would water the same every time you watered. You would always put on that, in your case, the 30 minutes that you were putting on, right? What you're trying to do is see how many days can you get between those waterings. Don't change the amount of watering, and like don't every day put on water in different amounts every day. Fill the glass and then see how long the lawn can make it last before you have to fill that glass again.
Perfect. Well, I sure appreciate the information, because I know that there's some people that not some people, but there's just general awareness is so important, because there's people that don't know what to ask or how to go about figuring out the efficiency of our water and being able to water landscapes and stuff. And so I appreciate you taking the time to come on and help us, spread the awareness. And so one thing I want to ask in closing is there things that the programs or rebates or things like that say even the conservative district is putting on, or the state, or even these areas that has things like that people can be aware of to maybe go look into or even participate in?
Yeah, so the state has two programs that I think would be available to your citizens. If they just visit the website Utah Water Savers, they can participate or explore toilet rebates and smart controller rebates. The state of Utah also does have a landscape rebate program for converting lawns. I think that can be explored through Utah Water Savers as well. In my region, we handle that program within the region with the citizens we serve. But because we don't serve Hilldale, it wouldn't be through my agency, it would be through the state of Utah. But there's some monies available for that as well. And it's all clearinghouse at Utah Water Savers.
Perfect. Well, I sure appreciate you taking time, Doug, to come on and go over some of these questions. I know that in a roundabout way, we've covered a good portion of all the bullet points that I sent. And it's just, I appreciate the awareness. Not only that, is I look forward to maybe in the future coming up with another set of questions and maybe pulling you back in for another interview later on as we get going.
Yeah, I thought of it before, Ray, I could have brought some props. I mean, I could have brought in a sprinkler valve and a filter and what a drip emitter looks like. The good news is everybody's got access to the internet. There's plenty here for them to go do some more exploration. There's some great resources there. And I'll tell you what, that portion of Utah is somewhere that I enjoy riding my motorcycle out through Monument Valley and up into eastern Utah. And so the next time I'm in Hilldale, I'm going to look you up. All right.
Do it. We'll take you out and show you some of there's actually some pretty amazing scenery up here and some of these parks and different places around. I'd be glad to host you if you get out this way.
Learn more about your community.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and the information stuff is invaluable, and I look forward to spreading more awareness and helping people not only in my hometown, but as well as people in the region to be able to show where they can step up and help. Because I know that you guys can only do so much to be able to preserve the water. And I noticed the projects and some of the things that you guys are coming up with, the reservoirs that you guys are getting in over in Tokerville and these other places to help conserve the water and get it to where we can actually use it versus just letting it run away or I guess in a roundabout way, it's not waste because it's probably just soaking into aquifers, but find a way to use it in a economical and conservative way. So we appreciate what you guys do and the services you guys offer and the insight.
Yeah. And as you said, it really is important to have a well-educated citizenry so that this information doesn't have to come from people like me. It comes from people sitting around a dinner table or engaging with their friend at the post office. That's where most information is really exchanged. So making sure that I make sure people have correct information, and then I hope that they share that information with others, because that really helps. So we
Yes.
appreciate your podcast.
All right. Thank you so much. And we look forward to interacting with you more.
All right. Take care, Ray. Have a good day.
Thanks, Doug. We'll talk to you later.